Thank you all for joining us today for the second webinar of the three-part NSRR CDE webinar series. Today, we're going to talk about the CDE development and implementation at NINDS and Hill Initiative and what we can learn from their experiences. My name is Ying Zhang. I'm a senior data scientist at NSRR. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today. Dr. Carolina Mendoza-Puccini is a program director in the Division of Clinical Research at the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, NINDS. She leads the NINDS Common Data Element Program and the HEAL CDE project. Her primary areas of expertise include data standards development, human subjects regulations, clinical research infrastructure, and data sharing policy and implementation. She actively contributes to the multiple trans-NIH data harmonization and standards initiatives, fostering cross-institute collaboration to enhance rigor, reproducibility, and secondary data use. She received a medical degree from the Universidad del Norte in Colombia. Prior to joining NINDS, she was a research fellow in the Division of Cognitive Disorders at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. Please welcome Dr. Mendoza-Puccini.
Thank you, Jen. Okay, I'm going to share my slides. Bear with me because I'm on my laptop today. And so I'm going to switch to presenter mode in a second. Okay, so I hope you're seeing, the presentation. So thank you for inviting me. You know, I'm always excited when I have to talk about common data elements. And today we're going to start. So we have two projects at NINDS on CDEs. One is the NINDS Common Data Elements Project, which has about 23 disease areas. And we have the NIH HEAL CDEs that is specific to the HEAL project. And I will talk about that in the second part of the presentation. And for the HEAL, I'm new to the HEAL. Okay, we're going to start with a poll because I want to know in the audience, how familiar are you with the common data elements? So if you've never heard about them, it's okay, you're in the right place. You know, if you've heard about them but never used them, or you know you're using them, or you regularly use them. So any answer is a good answer. Yin, are we waiting for the results or we can?
You can keep going. We'll share the results in just a little bit.
Yes, in a minute. So, okay, so here is our NINDS CDE landing page. That's a QR code. We will share the slides and there are, you know, links, codes, everything that you can go and explore. The NINDS CDE project was created back in 2009 and they started with 8 disease areas. That was way before I started. I started here over 9 years ago. We were one of the first NIH institutes developing CDEs. I think the National Cancer Institute was ahead of us, and you know they have a very large project. This has always been a trans NIH effort, and I will repeat this again. You know, I think one of the successes of the project is to make sure that all stakeholders are included. So we include other federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, academic institutions, national, you know, professional organizations, people with lived experiences, etc. And this is how we're organized. We have a steering committee that oversees the whole project. Then we call the disease areas working groups. So if it's Parkinson, it's the Parkinson working group, stroke working group, and so on. And every working group has an oversight committee that is comprised of usually the chairs of the committee. And if we need to invite an external person, you know, we'll invite them to make sure that everyone is included as much as we can. Then we have the working group. The working group is comprised of all the subgroups, and that will depend on the disease area. And each subgroup has 1 or 2 chairs. How do we develop? And I'm going to emphasize the development because I know that you may have 2 like avenues or to decide what to do, in the sleep CDEs, whether you have to develop CDEs because there aren't any, or the number one thing is reuse. And I'm pretty sure that you've heard about the FAIR principle. So the R is the reuse, don't reinvent the wheel. So we identify the CDs to develop in different ways. It can come from Congress, it can come from a gap in science. We don't have CDs in that area, or a large project that we're doing and we don't have CDEs. Sorry about that. And then we'll talk about a little bit more about the development. As I mentioned before, we collaborate with all the people that I mentioned before. We try to align as much as possible, with international standards like ISO or any other clinical standards like CDISC, and use other standards like for labs, the LOINC, and so on. And here, the next item is to include patient advocacy groups and industry. I forgot to mention that in the previous one. And in NINDS, we provide continuous guidance, but we don't have a direct influence on what they select. It's a process by external experts. They do the selection based on their expertise, and then NINDS just oversees the whole process. Make sure that they stick to the goal of the process or the project. So the development process before we do the kickoff meetings, we select the chairs, determine what are the subgroups, select and invite the members, and we do have a process. What are the members that we need based on not only the expertise but the background, geographical location, etc. We draft all the orientation documents. We draft selection criteria. I'll talk about that later. Review the classification, and also make sure that research what is existing in the field about that particular disease area or subdomains. So we have a classification. Don't get confused about all these names, but I think to keep in mind that for most data standards there are like two types of common data elements. One are the core or the required, and the others. So basically the required or the core tier 1, they have different names. They are the CDs that the experts decided that are like the foundational information or data that you should collect when you're doing research in that particular area. So here I have an example. So for Parkinson, as this is just to give you an idea of the numbers. So we have the disease and general core, general, disease agnostic. The disease core are, in this case, Parkinson specific. Then we have 120 CDs that are supplemental highly recommended, and those depend on the area of Parkinson you're doing. If you're doing rehab, cognition, the motor part, behavior, etc. And then we have 40 instrument guidance documents, and that they're also called notices of copyright. I will show you in a minute how they look. Very busy slide, but this is only to show you, the amount of clinical trials and studies at NINDS extramural and intramural that are using the common data elements. Many of them already finished, but some of them are still active. And these are all our clinical networks: StrokeNet, NeuroNext, NET is no longer, NET transition to Siren. And then we have intramural, and then we have SPARKS 3, that is a phase 3 clinical trial. And this one is a Neuro Data Bank Biobank study from NYU. And this, again, you don't have to learn or memorize all this. This is just to show you, to develop brand new CDEs or to establish a project, depending on what you're doing, there are a lot of steps. It's not an overnight thing. You have to be patient. In our case, it's about 18 months. But remember, these are large groups. These are 80 to 100 members. We range from 8 to 12 subgroups. So it's a lot of work. So obviously, it depends on how many members, the complexity of the project, etc. So what happens in each step, and I'm just going to highlight some things that are important. So the first part is to meet with the subgroup chairs. So the working group chairs that are the overall chairs of the group, we meet with the subgroup chairs and we go through all the definitions, the process, subgroup selection criteria. So I think this is key in any project, regardless if you're developing new CDs or not. You just have to know what you're doing. You have to define what you're doing, put it in writing, and documentation is always key. So we do an orientation meeting, then we do the subgroup meetings. In the subgroup meetings, they do the selection process. So we have two types of data. One is the one that comes from validated instruments, and we use a new selection process. I'll show you briefly what it is. And then we have the other data that we put into case report forms, and we develop CDEs on. And I'll show you an example too. And then we have what are the deliverables for each group. We have each group should have a definition of the subgroup plus a summary or a guidance document. So that one, these are like things that are different from a project and you will not see in other projects. Like we have a lot of documentation for the researchers to read, so they have a guidance. Okay, where to start or why do you have to collect this or not? We have documents that tells you, okay, in what population is this study good? Is this good for this age? Is age like for infants, not instruments, but like for, I don't know, 6 to 12 age or adolescents, etc. In what languages is it available? And I show you that too. Then we have the case report forms and data dictionaries. I'll show you an example. We go through an internal review. We check each other's work, and then we're going to a public review, and we address after that, I think 6 to 8 weeks, what feedbacks are appropriate to include. So the sustainability part is we want to meet at least once a year to make sure that the CDs are up to date. There aren't any new CDs, like new instruments that were validated or things that are no longer used in the field. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of funding to do this, so we prioritize based on whatever is outstanding at that point. Then the group reviews. We also have the CDE team. So in this particular project, we have a contractor, and the contractor makes sure that links are not broken, are updated, etc. And then we do internal reviews every year. So this is an example, and it's like this is a lot of information, and like walking you through the process, it will be a presentation by itself. But I wanted to give you examples, and these are hyperlinks. Again, using Parkinson's, which is one of the most recently developed projects. So we have a startup resource listing. It will give you a list of, for that particular disease area, what are the core, the general core, the disease core, and every classification. Then we have a highlight summary document that gives you this specific CD recommendations, and they match with the website on how that web page. Then we have the summary documents. So these are very important. I used these CDs before I came to NIH, and I appreciated at that point of all the information in writing. So the summary documents are so important because it gives you an idea, especially if you've never used CDs. And this is just a screenshot. It's like 2 or 3 pages. It's generally brief, but it has very, very useful information. Then you can find case report forms. There is a CRF search page. I put a link in here. You can type a keyword, or you can select, what domain or subdomain. If you want all the CRFs for the like cognition, you want a CRF, all the CRFs for stroke, and so on. And then down here, the data dictionaries. The data dictionaries have a lot of information. If you've never seen a CDE or you're not familiar with data science, this may be a little foreign, but it has basically all the information that you need to do about the CDE, from the name, definition, what are the permissible values, so what are the questions, what are the answers, what is the meaning of each thing if it's mapped to other data standards. And then lastly, we have the instrument guidance document. So these are for validated instruments. So this is something that always keep in mind. And I know, in the lessons learned, I don't have it there, but I learned this when I was doing research. in your budget, find out what instruments are copyrighted, and from those, how much they are. Sometimes the gold standard is copyrighted and you cannot find a comparable instrument, but have that before you put, or when you put your budget together. Know that, each license or the license for the whole thing is going to be $2,000. Sometimes they're not cheap, but they're important to collect. Then you have to, in there, you also have to, there's a link to who owns or who holds the copyright, or if you need permission or not, etc. There's a classification per disease area. Sometimes many of these validated instruments are used for TBI, Parkinson's, for more than one disease area. And that's the usual. There's a short description, comments, or special instructions, information on scoring and psychometrics, and how long does it take, how do you score this, strengths and weaknesses, and the references. And there's an example, a hyperlink in there. So let's jump quickly to TBI because I need to be good with the time here. So TBI is the last project that we're actually wrapping up the project. We're finishing the very last things. We always, in the things, because Ying asked me, what are the things that you think that you could have done better, or you could have done differently, and that's what we do in every iteration. Either if we revise a project or if we start one project from scratch. So this is a revision. This is the third revision of the TBI. These CDs were one of the first that we developed. So obviously, there's a huge evolution. So in this one, we always decide, okay, what can we do better? So in this time, we decided instead of doing a consensus-based, we want to do it a more evidence-based, and we created an online platform. And I want to thank, because all the work that we do, of the chairs, the members, these are volunteers. It's a lot of work. It's usually a year that is packed with a lot of work. And all these people with very busy schedules help us and give us a lot of hours on this project. So we created selection criteria. We refined the criteria that we had, and we created definitions for each one. So we based it on the Phoenix Toolkit criteria, which is not a CDE project. We just used it because it had a good foundation, but it's not exactly the same. Definitions on each one. This is not the final version, but I just put it as an example because we haven't published anything yet. So this is a report from the vetting platform. So we call vetting platform. It's an online, I think it's based on SharePoint. It's very simple. Our IT department helped us to develop this, and we're very grateful for that. And so it has the ID, or the short name of this is the document title, which is the validated instrument. And then up here, it has all the criteria. So the member, the reviewer, will decide, yes, no, not applicable, and they will have space to write comments. So this is just a screenshot of one part of it. So after that, it goes through a process of, okay, what are the instruments that will make it to the next step or not? And we're working on that, and we'll publish that, I don't know, in months, but we will. So let's switch to how NINDS requires the CDEs. How do we make sure that, we're creating a very good product? We're spending, we're investing a lot of funding and time from us and from the external members too. So how do we make sure that the community uses them, or at NIH? So we require it for our clinical networks, the one that I mentioned earlier. So this is an example of a Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, from our Siren network. So I pasted here on the left, screenshot of the title is the clinical trials at G3UH3. So it's clinical trials required. And then here in the bottom, it's just a part of the text because it's a list of requirements for year one. So here you can see that number one, is development of management systems, case report forms, and data dictionaries, incorporating applicable NINDS CDs. And here on the right, I have, I already mentioned, required for clinical networks. We incorporated in the NOFOs, and we also incorporated as a milestone in the Notice of Award, or NOA. So what's working well on this project? As I mentioned before, including experts from all backgrounds, avoid working in silos, making sure that, that doing the research, is anyone working on this or worked on this before? Have an established framework, put in writing what you're going to develop. And that's my number 4, put it in writing. Also invite members if there's a gap. So we have to be flexible throughout the process. Even if we are in the middle of the project and we either have a member that had to step down or we identify a gap. Okay, we don't have military. What can we do? So we have to identify the expert, invite that expert to review that case report form or that instrument. Also, key, have a timeline and designate someone to keep track of everything of the progress. And that's my contractor and me. Be open to changes, that's flexibility. Try to see what can you improve, what can you change. Sometimes, up to, we identify at the end, okay, the definition, this part is not really clear. So let's change it before we publish and we post everything. Pivot when needed, and again, document everything because that's so important. Our limitations, funding is number 1. I wish I could do more, but I can't. The members that may step down for different reasons, delays in finding those new members and onboarding them. Also, if you need to make changes, that's going to delay a little the progress of the project. And even for experienced people, starting is the most difficult part, like getting, because every project is unique. And every project has its particularities and challenges. So lessons learned, there's a learning curve for everyone, even if you've done this for many years. Coordination to avoid duplication of effort. Different groups may be developing slightly different CDEs. Maybe talk to them. Sometimes it's inevitable. You're working at the same time in parallel, but I think it's interesting or important, to talk to them. In terms of if you want to retrofit or map the CDs to data that was already collected, sometimes it's hard, time consuming, requires expertise. So my number 1 advice is identify from the beginning when you're putting together your application, what you're going to collect, how are you going to collect it, using what data standards, and use the data standards. And also that part of the budget. Whatever you're going to use, if it's a validated instrument, know how much it's going to cost. Okay, so let's switch to the HEAL CDs. So as I mentioned before, and I'm using Anthony, if you can see here, I'm using their slides. Anthony Domenichiello and Carolyn Conlin, they're both working with the HEAL program. They worked and they started before me. So they're the experts. I'm learning. Today is 1 year after the reduction in force. So it's, a hard day for everyone at NIH. And these are the people that worked on this project, that they developed the project from the very beginning. Laura Warner, Julia Volva, Andrew Siddons, Jessica Masaryk, and Anthony June. So we have to give them credit. So what is the NIH HEAL Initiative? The HEAL Initiative is an NIH-wide effort to speed scientific solutions to address the national opioid public health crisis, or more than 1,000 projects nationwide. So the way HEAL approaches the CDEs is in the similar way like NINDS does it with their networks. They have it in the NOFOs, in the Notice of Funding Opportunities. So here I pasted, the name of the most recent NOFO, or a recent one, or an active one. So it's the PrEP R15, and this is here the highlighted part. It says it must include a plan to use HEAL core common data elements. And I will tell you again, so they use again the core is a common word to use it for the required CDs. And I pasted some hyperlinks. And when I say I, is they're Anthony and Carolyn's slides. Okay, so key terms, so these are similar. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the core that are required and supplemental that are optional. And there's more to it because they're like divided by age and by type of study that they're doing. And this is the process of choosing and it's similar. They went through a consensus process. I'm not going to go through each step, but this is just to show you that it goes through a lot of steps, from the time, they do the lead review to identify what are the pain domains. So that's similar, they identify the pain domains, then the staff who's going to work on that, the experts. It goes through different committees, and you see here, impact, and don't worry about those names. It's basically a group of people and experts that they need to review this. So it goes through a lot of reviews to make sure that what they selected made sense for HEAL. And this is a more detail, the similar process, define program level questions, identify the core domains, solicit stakeholder input, and they identify all the experts, and then finalize the measurement strategies, taking into account a list of criteria that are here. And this is an example. This is the brief pain inventory. This is an example of the CRF. And the domain is pain severity. They also have domains of domains, the name of the instrument. And each question in this case, and you're going to see a little differences in this. Each question is a CDE. So CDE is basically the unit of your data collection. Even if it's the participant ID, date collected, every single data point is considered a CDE here in the HEAL project. And in the bottom, there's an example of the data dictionary, which is very similar. It has a CDE name, the variable name, definition, description, and all, questions, answers that are called permissible values, and additional information. But that's very similar to to every single project. You're going to see usually the same information. So lessons learned. So this presentation had a lot on data sharing. So I just highlighted in this particular slide, what was the lesson learned about CDEs, because there's a lot on data sharing. So the lessons learned is should consider how to maximize the impact of the data when selecting outcomes and data formats. So basically, when you're putting together your application, and again, please do it early. Know from the time you are doing it what are the data that you're going to collect. And here, this is, again, highlighting only what pertains to CDEs. Build common tools to upload standardized data to a repository of interest. Don't do it manually, of course. And always check the policies with the program officer or whoever is at NIH, your point of contact, because things may change. So this is for CDEs. So what we experienced. So initially, when they developed the CDEs, they included, it was only all one group, adults and adolescents. So that was a little confusing. So there were a lot of overlapping tools across the age groups. And then they developed early childhood instruments last year. And when I say they, it's we, because it's my project too, I'm sorry, since I'm new. To make sure that there's a difference in aging and select the appropriate instruments per age group. So learn from our mistakes. Again, decide upfront what you need to select that is comparable across ages. Of course, sometimes it's not possible. If you don't have exactly what is the population, plan for a full age spectrum early. One instrument, which is so hard from infant to older adults, I doubt it. So we are very flexible in working with the groups with the study or the trial teams, in finding out or realizing this instrument, we cannot use this instrument in this study, it's not appropriate. So we have a conversation, we talk, we usually explain, okay, the group usually explains why it's not appropriate, and that's fine. We'll usually find another, accept what they want to use, that is more appropriate, and then we move on. In some studies, for example, people that are in coma, and obviously we cannot collect any data, so that will be not applicable. So what helped, but is not, like the solution to everything, is use promise measures that have the good thing is that they have short forms and different short forms per instrument, and they also have for parent proxy, pediatric self-report, adult versions. They have all type of versions. Okay, and I think I finished. I know there are some questions, and we have time. I included some additional resources in here, links. And one thing that I forgot was my email, but it's in here. If you go to the website, it's in the website. So
Thank you very much, Carolina, for such a great presentation loaded with information. I think it would be very valuable for the sleep research community as we just start to think about developing sleep CDEs. So I know we have questions, but before we open up for more questions, I would like to do a short presentation on the available sleep-related CDEs and also any gaps and opportunities for the sleep research community. So let me share my screen. Thank you. Okay. So before I start today's presentation, I want to share with everyone one of the questions from the post-webinar survey. We asked the attendees to identify barriers for adopting CDEs. And the top answers are lack of readily available CDE for the research area, limited familiarity or training, limited resources, also difficulty integrating CDE into existing workflows. So the main purpose of this talk is to try to address two of those challenges. One is to identify sleep-related CDEs that are already available and also share some examples of integrating CDEs into existing workflows. So everyone already know the NIH CDE repository. It's a consortium of CDEs developed by the individual steward organizations. It has all the CDEs. However, it's hard to kind of search and browse CDEs by domain or disease or concept. It is less new user friendly, I would say. However, there are many other steward organizations who created CDEs, but also have platforms for their user group. They not only provide the CDE's metadata, but also a variety of resources to encourage CDE adoption. So one of them is FinX. They organize their CDEs by protocols, and all those protocols are downloadable as REDCap zip files that you can import into your REDCap project. And CDE CSV format is compatible with the dbGaP submission workflows. NCI also has a library for reusable CFR and data collection templates. Can download them in Excel, XML, also REDCap data dictionaries. CADSR also have APIs developed to allow other platforms and local tools to pull the metadata content of the CDEs easily. And as Carolina just demoed, NINDS has the CDE catalog that you can use to search CDE by disease. Heal Initiative have their own platform that allow for semantic searches. So when you search for sleep, for example, it doesn't just do an exact match of the keywords, but the mapped semantic concept as well. So here's an example of FinX protocol. This is a sleep apnea protocol for adult. The main page has some basic description and all the question variables collected in that protocol. Then you can also see the source for the protocol is Berlin questionnaire. Then you can download all the variables in a CSV format. And NINDS CDE catalog. If you go to their website, first remember to click Show All on the top of the disease name. Then if you type in sleep, you will be able to see 191 unique CDEs. That's a match. Then you can further filter down by domain, population, copyright, and so on. And all those CDEs are downloadable as CSV files. And here's a screenshot for the HEAL initiative. Again, if you search for sleep, then it will show studies, CDEs, related concepts, and individual variables contain sleep as a keyword. And if you click on any of the CDEs, it will show the full kind of instrument and associated metadata. So other than those upstream creator for CDEs, there are also some downstream platform that uses CDEs as well. So one is RedCap. You can import data dictionaries from like a zip file, such as the one that Finex you can download from Finex. Then RedCap itself has an internal CDE library that uses the public NIH CDE repository API that you can use to search and retrieve metadata, which I will show in a later slide. CDA Workbench, the Center for Expanded Data Annotation and Retrieval, is a biomedical metadata authoring platform. So users can use their system to build and manage the metadata for their study. So CDA allows user to search, browse, and import CDEs directly. And it's also a requirement to be HEAL compliant for the HEAL funded studies as well. So here is a RedCap project. So when I try to build a new form, instead of trying to like build the question myself, I can do click the import from field bank button. And then in the select a catalog to search, you can select NIH CDE repository. And after that, if you put in keywords like promise sleep-related impairment, then it will pop up the corresponding CDE. Then this is what you will see after you click on the CDE. It automatically populates all the metadata fields from choices to variable name to data types and so on. So it's much easier to do to build a form using CDEs than trying to build it from scratch. And here's a list of sleep-related survey instruments with items already developed at CDEs. So there are some OSA-related survey instruments, sleep disorders in general, and then emotional and behavior problems such as depression, anxiety, some neurodegenerative disorders, quality of life in general, and many other related survey instruments. Other than survey instruments, as Carolina mentioned, there are also polysomnography-related CDEs in the repository. There are currently 68, and here's a selected list of those CDEs. And some of them are pretty commonly used in our research, like sleep latency duration, sleep total duration, average oxygen saturation, and so on. Okay, as we kind of have a sense of what sleep-related CDEs are already available, I think people start to identify some of the gaps. So I would say first is availability. Even though we see some sleep-related survey instrument, there's still a lack of commonly used sleep survey instruments. For example, the Epworth Sleepiness Scale is not there. Morningness, eveningness questionnaire for circadian rhythm. In fact, there's no CDEs for circadian rhythm currently. And then there's also a lack of sleep study specific metadata CDEs to support the metadata documentation sharing. For example, polysomnography is central to sleep studies, but there's no CDE to help capture, say, montage and sampling rate information. And then even for the available sleep CDEs, there's still a lack of granularity. For example, the current polysomnography CDE definitions don't have enough granularity to establish comparability. So for instance, there's no granularity on how the respiratory events or the hypopnea was defined and scored. So it's hard to compare, okay, the AHI from study A is truly comparable to study B. And then last but not least, the lack of organization. I think we don't currently have a platform like NINDS, like Q Initiative, that help to organize sleep-related CDEs by domains or concept. So for sleep researcher, it's hard to kind of familiarize with all the CDEs available and try to identify what's appropriate for their research interest. And I want to brief talk about the challenges in sleep and circadian research in particular. So this diagram is from a paper we published in 2024 on Sleep Journal, trying to capture the multi-levels of heterogeneities across the data lifecycle, from data collection to processing to storage, and also metadata definition. And also that's different for different types of data, like actigraphy, polysomnography, and patient-reported outcomes. So this sort of multi-layered, modality-specific heterogeneity makes it really challenging for building data standards, harmonization, and data reuse for the sleep research community. However, there's still opportunities for sleep CDE development by leveraging the strength of the sleep research community. So for one, there are widely used conceptual framework, such as the RU-SADED model for common sleep dimensions and the practice guidelines issued by American Academy of Sleep Medicine that will help to build sort of a shared language or construct for building CDEs, which makes us better positioned for building CDEs that are going to adopt it by the community as a whole. And then there are large cohorts using common instruments like PROMIS, and there is existing community adoption of shared tools, data formats, and conventions like the EDF format or GDIR for actigraphy. Those can provide a strong foundation for broader harmonization and CDE adoption. And last but not least, we do have rich and well-annotated data, such as the one that NSRR standardized metadata and harmonized data. So that's all I have for my presentation. I think now we can open up for Q&A.
Thank you, Ying. This is wonderful. So we have a question that Carolina has addressed partially in the chat. And there was kind of a related question as well. As demonstrated in your presentation, there's real work involved in creating and maintaining domain-specific CDEs, with several stakeholders needed to be involved. Are there specific funding mechanisms that the NIH through NLM or even through domain-specific institutes, such as NDIS, that may offer to have this built and maintained for prosperity?
So I can answer that. I know I typed it, but I can answer it again and give more information, more background. So right now, the NINDS, the CDE project, is ran by NINDS. So we lead the project. We have a contractor who does all the logistics and all the data science part, because I'm not a data scientist, I'm a physician. And we constantly revise, what we have as much as we can, as I mentioned, because of the funding. And moving forward, we know the project continues. So far, I haven't heard differently. We continue on hopefully, I don't know when, because there's a lot of uncertainty, as you know, if we can develop new disease areas. We want to develop, comas and disorders of consciousness. And then we have a list. We used to have, and I think it's still on our webpage, but I think they removed that too. Like we used to have a form where people could propose new CDEs. But again, we don't have the funding, so we don't know. So, okay, why we change the consensus based to the more evidence based? I think it's to improve the rigor of the process. That's, the short answer. Now we have, and also the consensus based, we did have documentation before, but now we have more comprehensive documentation. We're able to pull reports, we're able to pull all the references because that's in the, every reviewer, they provide the reference to each instrument, the validation paper for if it's only one for one population, for different populations, languages, and so on, to make sure that they match the criteria. What they answered is based on, the references that they're providing.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Great. A related question. A single PSG study could involve over 1,000 variables. Is it feasible for a process involving 18 months per CDE and dependent on future NIH funds available and many volunteer committees to serve the anticipated volume of research needs? There are hundreds of sleep projects.
Is PSG the Parkinson's group?
Oh no, sorry. It's a polysomnogram or polysomnograph. So a
Okay, yeah,
sleep
this is
specific study.
okay. Yes, so TBI has a gazillion. Obviously, that's another thing that I didn't touch on, and that's a great question. Don't be over ambitious. You have to start small. First, you're not going to develop CDs for every single like 1,800 data points that you have. You have to start smaller, and as you learn how to do it, then you move on. And develop more. But for TBI, one of the issues that we had with the version one, obviously, it was many years ago. There were so many unknowns, even in the CD world. We were very new with the CDs. So the first group, they recommended too many instruments. It was overwhelming. So people, that was the main complaint. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go or where to start. So then on version, I think two, they developed pediatric because we were missing that. And then, finally we got to version three. It was many years in the making when they decided, no, we cannot recommend like 10 different instruments to assess memory or any other domain. I always mention cognition because that's my background. So I think that's the thing. Be realistic in what you can do, and also be realistic in the adoption part. And I think I should have touched on that too. The adoption part, and that's a part of the lessons learned. It is hard. I'm not gonna lie to you. It is slow. It took us many, many years for people to understand the value of using CDs, and I hope you could attend my colleague Robin Taylor's talk, because she mentions about the benefits. What are the CDs? Like more like 101 CDs. Because having, and I can compare that because I lived it. I developed all the data collection tools from scratch, and then I use CDs. I said, oh my god, why didn't we use this before? The case report forms are readily available to download. The data dictionaries, with minor tweaks, you can upload them into RedCap. So many things that you don't have to do. The guidance is already there. It even tells you, where to go if it's copyrighted. So yeah, it's a process, and you have to be patient.
I also want to add to that. in terms of like 1,000 variables for polysomnography data, I think a lot of them are permutations of a subset of canonical kind of terms with different variations on a technical level, like in different sleep stage, in different body position, with different threshold. So the effective CDE you need to develop for that maybe is only 10%. But even with that, I want to kind of advertise for the third webinar we're going to have next Wednesday, our collaborator from Biodata Catalyst exploring using AI to generate modularized CDEs. So you can like put modifier and canonical terms together, which will give you a lot of flexibility and much more, it's expendable to build all those variables you actually see in the real world data. So I hope everyone will be at the third webinar to conclude this series. Okay, back to Carolina. Thank you.
I think that
I don't know if there was.
addresses the question. We have another open question. From your perspective, what potential enhancements to the NIH CDE-R API could better support the use of CDEs in platforms like REDCap?
Okay, unfortunately, that is way out of my area of expertise. That's why I work with people that know that. But I think that NLM may have an answer. They have APIs, and that's the extent of my knowledge. But I think if you send me the question, I can find out with them. And I think they may be in the audience, but yes,
Thank you.
sorry.
Ying, no worries. Ying, do you have anything to add?
Mm.
Okay, I think those are our open questions. Oh, a new one has
Oh,
just come
one
in.
more.
The data dictionary includes granular variables such as polysomnography study type. For investigators managing a no-cost extension or transitioning legacy sleep data into the new NINDS 2.0 framework, what is the recommended crosswalking strategy to ensure that the historical variables remain harmonized with these updated NIH standards?
I don't know what he means with the updated or framework. I don't know. I don't really understand because we don't have. I don't know if he's referring or they're referring to the revised CDEs. I honestly don't know. I'm sorry. What I can think of is maybe in terms of the budget. I think maybe that's the question. How do you harmonize the data? And that's a very tricky question because it will depend on what are you applying to your grant, or once you are, once the grant starts, if you can ask for a supplement or find a supplement from not necessarily the same institute, but like ODSS or NLM. I don't know, Ying, you have something else to add in terms of the data science part of how to do that harmonization.
No, I don't have anything to add here, unfortunately.
I would say talk to your program officer and explore and talk to whatever institute, if it's NCI, talk to the people that work with the CDEs, depending on the institute.
All right, I guess that's all the questions we have, right, Paige?
Yeah, just really quickly, I would add to this last question that really this is one of the reasons that we're having these types of discussions in the sleep research community. We recognize that it is a little bit painful with legacy data to transition it into something that is FAIR compliant, that is usable, that is findable, that's up to date with the latest standards. But NSRR users will be familiar with Ying's work in harmonization within the NSRR, ensuring that we have those types of important variables harmonized, and the continuation of that will be development and continued development of CDEs for the sleep area. Ying, do you have additional questions?
No. So I guess that's all for today's presentation. Thank you all again for joining us today and for the great discussion. Before we wrap up, I want to encourage everyone to join us for the next webinar, also the last one in the series, which will be the same time next Wednesday. Dr. Ann Thesson will share her work using agentic AI to scale up data integration by harmonizing CDEs at NHLBI Biodata Catalyst, specifically using the NSRR sleep data. The slides and a recording of today's presentation will be made available after the webinar. And we would really appreciate if you could complete a brief post-webinar survey that will help for the future webinar planning. So thank you, and we hope to see you next time.